The storm did not care who was innocent. It did not ask why a woman was bound to a fence and left to freeze. It only howled, relentless and alive, as if the prairie itself had decided to pass judgment. And somewhere in that screaming white darkness, a choice was about to be made that would change two broken lives forever. Kansas, winter of 1886. The prairie lay smothered beneath a sky the color of iron, the land erased into a spinning emptiness where distance and direction lost all meaning. The blizzard had been stalking the plains since afternoon, rolling in low and heavy, swallowing fence lines and homesteads with a slow, merciless patience. By nightfall, the world had narrowed to a choking swirl of snow and wind, a place where even sound seemed to die before it could reach another soul. Ruth Marin could no longer tell where her body ended and the storm began. Her wrists were bound tight to the rough fence posts behind her, the rope frozen stiff, biting so deeply into her skin that sensation came and went in dull flashes. Warmth slid down her fingers, but she couldn't tell if it was blood or melting ice. Her hands were numb, her arms trembling, shoulders locked in agony. Her hair lashed her face in frozen whips, sticking to her cheeks, her lashes clotted white. Each breath scraped her throat raw, air burning like broken glass in her lungs. Somewhere behind her, barely visible through the storm, her in-laws stood watching for a moment longer before turning away. Jonah Marin's mother spoke only once, her voice thin and sharp as it cut through the wind. "God will judge you, Ruth. We wash our hands of this." Ruth strained against the ropes, pain flaring as she tried to twist toward them. "I didn't poison him. He was sick for weeks. You know he was sick. Please, please don't leave me here." Her words vanished into the storm, ripped apart and scattered like ash. The heavy steps of the Marins faded, swallowed by the rising shriek of the wind. They did not look back. The fence groaned as the blizzard pressed against it, boards creaking under the strain. Ruth's legs shook, her knees buckling as snow piled higher against her skirts, creeping up inch by inch with every savage gust. Her breaths grew shallow. The cold slid deeper, gnawing its way past skin and muscle until it reached her bones. She tried again, her voice breaking, "Somebody, anyone, please." The storm answered with a scream. Her vision blurred, the edges of the world softening as her lashes froze together. Terror thudded in her chest, sharp and insistent, the only thing the cold couldn't numb. She thought of the classroom she once kept warm with a pot-bellied stove, of children bent over slates, tongues poking out in concentration. She thought of the chalkboard she'd saved months to buy, of the bell she rang each morning. She thought of her husband before grief hollowed him out, before the drinking, before the nights he lay silent beside her, breath shallow and eyes empty. She wondered if this was how her story ended, bound to a fence, buried alive beneath snow, condemned by the very people she had tried so hard to love. Miles away, Declan Pike pulled his coat collar higher as he walked the boundary of his ranch, boots crunching through drifts that reached his calves. Most nights he would have stayed inside, fire stoked, doors barred against the weather, but tonight something had set him restless. There was a wrongness in the wind, a break in its rhythm that scraped at him. He paused near the northern fence line, one gloved hand resting against a post rimed with ice. The prairie roared around him, white and furious, but beneath it, faint and flickering, was a sound that didn't belong. A cry, thin and desperate, carried and lost and carried again, like a dying flame refusing to go out. Declan tilted his head, listening harder. His left eye, clouded and half-blind, watered in the cold, but his right eye stayed sharp, scanning the blur. "That's no coyote," he muttered. He whistled once, sharp and sure. His horse, Bramble, pushed through the snow with a snort, steam rolling from its nostrils. Declan swung into the saddle and urged the gelding forward, leaning low, eyes cutting through the storm as best they could. The cry came again, weaker now. "Hold on," he murmured, not yet knowing to whom. Through the blowing white, a broken stretch of fence emerged, half-buried, leaning under the weight of ice. Then he saw movement, barely perceptible against the post. A body slumped sideways, hair frozen to her cheek, rope stiff and white around her wrists. Declan's chest seized. "Hell," he breathed. "Someone left you to die." He dismounted before Bramble fully stopped, boots sinking deep as he waded through the drift. The woman didn't react when he lifted her chin, fingers careful despite the urgency pounding through him. Her skin was pale, blue tinging her lips, eyes half open but vacant. He bent close so his voice could cut through the storm. "Miss, can you hear me?" Her mouth quivered. A single word slipped free, barely a sound. "Please." Declan drew his knife and hacked through the frozen rope, catching her as she sagged forward into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her body racked with violent shivers that didn't seem to warm her at all. He shrugged out of his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, pulling her close, pressing her against his chest to share what heat he had. "I've got you," he said, voice steady, grounding himself as much as her. "I'm taking you home." He lifted her onto the horse and mounted behind her, one arm braced around her middle to keep her upright, his body turned into the wind to shield her as he turned Bramble toward the distant glow of his cabin lantern. Ruth's head lolled back against him. For the first time that night, he felt her breathe, faint but there. It was enough to make him press his heels into Bramble's sides. "Hold on, miss," he whispered into her frozen hair. "You're not dying out here tonight. Not while I'm still breathing." He kicked the cabin door open with his boot, snow swirling in behind him as he carried her inside. The storm shrieked, clawing at the threshold, but when he slammed the door shut, the sound dulled, muffled into a distant roar. He moved fast, laying her gently on the cot near the fire. He stripped off her boots and gloves, fingers stiff and burning as he worked the frozen leather free. Her skin was waxy pale, already mottled in places, frostbite creeping up her hands. He stoked the fire until it roared, feeding it kindling, then logs, coaxing warmth back into the room. He filled a pot with water, tossed in oats, dried apples, a pinch of salt, setting it to simmer. From the old chest beneath the window, he pulled out what remained of his mother's remedies, bundles of herbs, tin salves labeled in shaky script. "Best I can do," he muttered. He soaked cloths in warm water and pressed them gently to her hands and feet. She flinched even in her unconsciousness, lips moving soundlessly. "Easy now," he murmured. Time stretched, an hour bleeding into the next as he sat beside her, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. When she finally came to, it was sudden. Her eyes flew open, wild with fear, and she scrambled back against the wall, clutching the blanket to herself as if it were armor. "Where am I? What did you do to me?" Declan lifted his hands slowly, palms open. "You're safe," he said. "No one here wants to hurt you." "Don't lie to me," she snapped, voice raw and cracking. "They sent you, didn't they?" "No," he replied. "I don't know who they are. I found you near the fence, freezing. That's all." She scanned the room, breath coming hard, eyes snagging on the fire, the pot, the small, rough cabin. He stepped back, giving her space. "If you want to leave, I won't stop you. But out there, it's death tonight. You won't make it 20 paces." She stared at the door, jaw tight, then lowered her head. "They said I poisoned him," she whispered. "Said I fed him something wrong. He was sick for weeks. I tried everything. Everything. But when he died, they needed someone to blame." "Your husband?" Declan asked quietly. She nodded. "Samuel Marin. His family never liked me. Thought I was too proud because I taught school. After he died, they turned on me. When I asked for my things, they tied me to that fence." Declan said nothing for a long time. The fire cracked softly. Finally he spoke. "People believe what suits them. I lost a brother once to a lie like that." She glanced at him, really seeing him now, the scar along his cheek, the clouded eye. "They tried to shoot me too," he said. "Didn't finish it, but they took enough. The air between them shifted. He poured porridge into a tin bowl and set it near her. "I can't promise much," he said. "But the food's hot and the roof holds." She didn't thank him, but she took the spoon. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, for the first time in days, Ruth ate, and Declan Pike sat across from her, one-eyed and silent, firelight flickering between two people bound not by rope, but by the weight of false judgment. The blizzard passed, but the cold lingered. Days crept by inside the cabin, slow as meltwater dripping from an icicle. Ruth's color returned bit by bit, though she limped from the damage to her feet. Declan never pressed her for answers. He mended fences by day, cooked beans or rabbit by night. Words were few, but something settled between them, solid and quiet, until the rumors came. Declan heard first from a trader swapping bullets for cornmeal. "You hear about the Marin woman? Word is she killed her husband, ran off with some old rancher. Folks say she's got him twisted around her finger." Declan said nothing. That night, a knock came, 3 firm raps, official. He opened the door to a deputy and a man in a coat too clean for the prairie. "Declan Pike. We're here under order of the county court. This concerns Ruth Marin." Ruth stepped forward, pale but steady. "I'm not hiding." The man introduced himself as Thorne, speaking of accusations and suspicion. Declan blocked his path. "There's no warrant. No order. Only slander. She's not going anywhere tonight." Thorne sneered, warning him, tossing a summons to the floor. 5 days. After they left, silence weighed heavy. "I should go," Ruth whispered. "No one stood up for me like that," she said. Declan met her gaze. "Maybe it's time someone did." By the 4th morning, Ruth rose before dawn, helping without being asked. A neighbor boy wandered by, tracing letters in the dirt. Ruth knelt beside him, teaching gently. Declan watched from a distance. He saw her smile for the first time. That evening, she asked why he lived alone. He told her of blame and loss, of a woman who left when he was accused of something he hadn't done. She listened, understanding settling between them like shared breath. Two broken people, neither asking for comfort, both offering it anyway. Something began to change, not love yet, but respect deep and unspoken, the kind that says I see your scars and won't turn away. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that neither of them named but both relied on. Morning frost crept across the windows like delicate lace, melting slowly once the stove was lit, while the wind moved restlessly around the cabin as if searching for a way back inside. Ruth healed in careful increments. The damage to her hands left her fingers stiff and aching, her feet slow and tender, but she refused to sit idle. Declan never asked for her help, never suggested she earn her keep, yet every day she found something that needed doing. She swept ash from the hearth, pulled water from the well with quiet determination, folded blankets worn thin by years of use. There was something almost reverent in the way she moved through the space, as though grateful not just for the shelter, but for the chance to be useful again. Declan noticed everything and commented on nothing. He rose before dawn to tend the horses, to check fence lines, to do the work that kept the ranch alive. When he returned, coffee was waiting, poured into a chipped tin cup and set by the stove without ceremony. They exchanged few words, but their silences were not empty. They were filled with understanding, with the shared knowledge of what it meant to be judged and found wanting without proof. On the 3rd morning after the summons, a boy from a neighboring spread wandered up the drive, boots too big for his feet, a basket of eggs clutched to his chest. His name was Emmett, and he came with messages or small trades when his father didn't want to ride out himself. Ruth noticed him lingering by the fence, dragging a stick through the snow, forming crooked shapes in the dirt where the frost had melted. She crouched beside him slowly, joints stiff, careful not to startle him. "That's an E," she said softly, pointing. The boy blinked, surprised. "My pa says letters are for town folk." Ruth smiled, faint but warm. I used to teach in a town. A small one. We had books, chalkboards, even a bell. She drew an A beside his shaky mark. Want to learn a few more? From that day on, Emmett came more often, sometimes without eggs, sometimes with nothing but questions. Declan watched from the barn door as Ruth knelt beside the boy, tracing letters with pine needles, drawing numbers in frost on the windowpane. She didn't smile easily, but when she did, it lit something behind her eyes that had been dimmed for too long. He heard her laugh one afternoon in the corral, a soft, startled sound, when the bay mare refused to let her newborn nurse. Ruth approached the animal with calm patience, murmuring low, steady words. "I know it hurts," she said, hand gentle on the mare's neck. "But you have to let her try." Declan leaned against the fence, arms folded, watching as the mare finally lowered her head and allowed the foal close. Ruth glanced back then, meeting his gaze, her smile lingering just a moment longer than necessary. That evening, snow drifted down in lazy spirals outside the windows. Ruth sat by the fire, mending the same torn sleeve she'd been working on for days. Declan cleaned his rifle near the hearth, movements precise. "Why do you live alone?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer at once. The silence stretched, comfortable, unforced. "There was someone, once," he said at last. "We were engaged. Someone accused me of stealing a horse. I took the blame to protect a boy who couldn't read the charges against him. A fight broke out. A man drew first. I shot second." He tapped the scar along his cheek. She believed them. She left. Ruth set her sewing aside. "So you know what it's like," she said, "to have your truth dismissed." He didn't nod, but his stillness was answer enough. "I was trying to keep Samuel alive," Ruth said. "The well water made him sick. I boiled herbs, begged him to rest. His parents said I wanted the land. Said I was poisoning him." Her hands trembled. Declan poured tea and set it beside her without a word. That night, the wind battered the cabin, but Ruth didn't retreat to the cot early. She stayed by the fire, knees drawn up, wrapped in a quilt that smelled faintly of wood smoke. Declan sat across from her, chair creaking. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The stillness between them was heavy but not cold. Two people wronged by the world, neither asking for comfort, both offering it in quiet ways. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of something that did not require promises. It was on a pale morning, frost clinging to the windows, that Ruth spoke of the letter. Almost to herself, she said she'd seen Samuel write it the night before he died, folding it carefully, tucking it into his gray coat with the broken button. Declan's attention sharpened. That night, they rode out together beneath a clouded moon, moving through shadows toward the Marin homestead. The barn loomed dark and silent, snow crunching underfoot. Ruth knelt at the back wall, fingers finding the loose board Samuel used to hide tobacco. Declan passed her his knife. With careful pressure, the board lifted, revealing a tin wrapped in wax paper. Inside were folded letters, brittle with age. One bore her name. She opened it, breath catching as she read Samuel's words, apology and truth bleeding through faded ink. Declan turned away, giving her privacy, but he heard her breath break, heard the quiet devastation in her sobs. "They called me poison," she whispered. "Said I was barren, greedy." Declan crouched beside her, hand resting on her shoulder. "You are not the villain of this story." She looked at him then, eyes shining with tears. "This changes everything," she said. "Yes," he replied. "Now we bring the truth into the light." In Ash Creek, the courtroom filled with whispers and judgment. Ruth sat rigid, the letter clutched in her hands. Declan sat behind her, unreadable. The Marin stared like stone. Accusations were thrown, lies repeated. Ruth stood and spoke, voice steady despite trembling hands. Declan testified, offering truth and willingness to swear to it. The judge read the letter in silence, weighed it against empty claims. When the gavel fell, the charges were dismissed. Outside, snow blew along the boardwalk, and Ruth stood unsure. "I'm free," she said softly, "but I have nowhere to go." Declan looked toward the ranch, then back at her. "Maybe you start again here." He didn't tell her to stay. He asked. And for the first time since the storm took everything, Ruth felt something close to belonging. Spring came slowly to the prairie, not with warmth at first, but with patience. Snow retreated in narrow veins, slipping away from fence posts and barn walls, leaving the ground dark and raw beneath. The wind softened, trading its bite for a restless sigh, and the sky stretched wider each day, pale blue and watchful. Ruth stayed. Not because Declan insisted, and not because she had nowhere else to go, but because the land no longer felt like it was pushing her away. She moved into the rhythm of the ranch as if she had always known it, as if her body remembered work that didn't belong to classrooms or chalk dust. Mornings began with the stove, the kettle, the sound of boots on the porch as Declan came in from feeding the horses. They exchanged nods, small glances that carried more weight than words. She helped where she could, kept records when his numbers tangled, patched shirts, sorted supplies. Declan never corrected her, never claimed authority over what she did. It wasn't charity. It was partnership forming quietly, like roots taking hold beneath the soil where no one could see. The old goat shed stood at the edge of the property, sagging under its own neglect. Ruth noticed it one afternoon, boards warped, roof slanted, windows broken and clouded with grime. She stood there longer than necessary, hands on her hips, eyes calculating. Declan watched from a distance, leaning against a fence post. Later that evening, she mentioned it as if it were nothing more than an idle thought. "It could be fixed," she said. "With some planks. A stove." He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "If you want to try." That was all it took. They worked side by side for weeks. Declan hauled lumber and hammered beams back into place. Ruth scrubbed soot from the walls, patched gaps, stitched curtains from old feed sacks. Her hands ached, her fingers stiffened in the mornings, but she never complained. When the slate board was finally nailed to the far wall, she stood back and stared at it, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and hope. By early spring, the shed was no longer a shed. It was a schoolhouse, modest and uneven, but solid. For benches, a small stove, a shelf for books she'd collected from traders and neighbors willing to part with old primers. Word spread slowly, the way things always did in places where trust had to be earned inch by inch. The widow teacher. The woman who'd been accused. The one Declan Pike sheltered. At first, only 2 children came, brought by mothers who waited outside, arms folded tight, eyes sharp and measuring. Ruth greeted each child by name, her voice calm, unguarded. She never spoke of the past. She taught letters, numbers, stories. She read aloud until the children leaned closer, drawn in by her steady tone. By the second week, more arrived. By the fourth, the benches were full. One morning, a red-haired boy named Eli raised his hand and asked, "Miss Ruth, are you happy now?" She paused, chalk dust clinging to her fingers, and for a moment she didn't answer. Then she touched her chest lightly and nodded. "I think I am." After the children left that day, she swept the floor slowly, humming without realizing it. The door creaked open behind her. Declan stood there, holding a small leather ledger. He cleared his throat. "Thought you might look at this. My books. Reckon I never was much good with numbers." She smiled, took the ledger, their fingers brushing. They sat by the stove, shoulders close but not touching, Ruth pointing out where calves had been counted twice, where feed costs didn't line up. Declan listened, asked questions, nodded. When she finished, he didn't reach for the book right away. "You didn't come just for the math," she said quietly. He met her gaze. "No. They sat in the hush of evening, wind tapping softly at the shutters. "You don't need to say anything," she added. He nodded, but she reached out anyway, laying her hand over his. "I used to think silence meant indifference," she whispered. "Now I know better." He didn't pull away. Trouble came on a gray morning, the kind that carried a weight no weather could explain. Ruth was sweeping the schoolhouse porch when she saw the riders crest the rise. 6 men, coats snapping in the wind, eyes hard. Edwin Hale rode at the front, his jaw set like stone. "You're not licensed," he barked, pulling his horse to a stop. "Teaching without approval. It's dangerous." Ruth straightened, gripping the broom. "I'm teaching them to read and count." He spat into the dirt. "You're poisoning minds." The parents gathered nearby, some looking away, some standing firm. Hooves sounded behind her, steady and unhurried. Declan rode in and dismounted, positioning himself between Ruth and the men. He said nothing at first, just looked at them until the air shifted. "She comes with me," Edwin sneered. "That's not law." Declan stepped forward. "You want her, you go through me." Silence fell. One rider shifted back. Another looked at the ground. Edwin's jaw tightened, then he turned his horse away. The others followed. Later, back at the cabin, neither of them spoke of it. Declan chopped wood. Ruth set the table. Their hands brushed, and this time neither moved away. They sat together, fire crackling, the last snow melting from the eaves like a slow ticking clock. Ruth reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Declan turned his palm to meet it. There was no kiss, no promise, just warmth and a stillness that felt earned. That night, the schoolhouse glowed softly, laughter echoing faintly. Above it all, birds crossed the wide Kansas sky, flying toward something new. The sky had changed its mind about winter, though the land still remembered it. Snow clung only in the shadows now, hiding beneath fence rails and north-facing walls, while the open ground breathed again, damp and dark, ready for seed. Mornings arrived with birds instead of silence, their calls threading through the air like fragile promises. Ruth stood on the schoolhouse porch at dawn, hands wrapped around a tin mug, watching light spill across the prairie. The building behind her still smelled faintly of chalk and smoke, of children and effort and something new being born from old boards. She no longer felt like a woman waiting for the world to decide her fate. She was already living it. Declan watched her from the corral, leaning against a post as he tightened the saddle strap. He had learned her habits without meaning to, the way she paused before stepping into a room, the way she touched the doorframe of the schoolhouse as if grounding herself before the children arrived. There was strength in her now that hadn't been there when he'd cut her from the fence, but there was also softness, the kind that chose to stay open even after being broken. They worked without talking much, as they always did. Ruth taught through the morning, her voice steady, patient, carrying over the scratch of chalk and the shuffle of small boots. Declan repaired a stretch of fencing near the creek, hands moving on instinct. At midday, the children scattered home, laughter trailing behind them like loose ribbons. Ruth swept the floor, closed the shutters, and stepped outside just as Declan rode up. He reined in beside her, tipped his hat slightly. "You hungry?" "Always," she said, surprised at the ease of her answer. They ate together at the cabin table, sun pouring through the window, dust motes dancing in the light. For a while, neither spoke. Then Ruth set her fork down. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked, not accusing, just curious. Declan considered it. "Thought about it once," he said. "Long time ago." She nodded, accepting that answer for what it was. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of hooves. Declan's posture changed, subtle but immediate. Ruth followed his gaze. Riders appeared on the rise, moving fast. Not 6 this time. More. 8, maybe 9, dust and grit kicked up behind them. At the front rode Edwin Hale again, his expression darker, more determined. Behind him were men Ruth recognized from town, men who had whispered and watched and never spoken up. Declan stood slowly. "Stay here," he said. Ruth shook her head. "I won't hide." They met them near the edge of the property, the schoolhouse visible behind Ruth like a quiet witness. Edwin didn't bother with pretense this time. "You've been warned, Pike. You and your widow are stirring trouble. Teaching without authority. Turning folks against their own." Declan's voice was calm. "She's teaching children to read. That's not trouble." Edwin laughed, harsh and humorless. "You think this ends here? You think one judge's word and a shack schoolhouse changes what people believe?" Ruth stepped forward. "You don't need to believe me," she said. "You only need to leave these children alone." Edwin's eyes narrowed. "Or what?" Declan moved then, not fast, not threatening, just present. "Or you'll have to decide how much blood you're willing to spill to stop a woman from holding a piece of chalk." The men shifted. One glanced back toward town. Another spat into the dirt, uneasy. This wasn't a drunken mob. This was a choice, laid bare. The wind lifted, carrying the scent of thawed earth. Edwin's jaw worked. He looked at Ruth, really looked, saw no fear there, only resolve. He turned his horse sharply. "This isn't over," he snapped, but the words rang hollow as he rode off. The others followed, slower now, doubt riding with them. When the dust settled, Ruth realized her hands were shaking. Declan noticed. He reached out, not to pull her close, just to steady her. She covered his hand with hers, grounding herself in the warmth of it. That night, the cabin felt different. Not tense, not fearful, but charged. Ruth set the table while Declan stoked the fire. They moved around each other with quiet awareness, the space between them no longer empty. After supper, they sat in silence, the kind that invited truth instead of hiding it. "I don't want to be brave anymore," Ruth said softly. "I just want to live." Declan looked at her, really looked, the firelight catching in his one good eye. "Then live here," he said. "Not as a guest. As someone who belongs." Her breath caught. She nodded once. That was all it took. Spring deepened. The schoolhouse became a fixture, the laughter of children a daily sound. Ruth planted a small garden beside the cabin, hands in the soil, coaxing green life from the ground. Declan fixed the goat shed roof again, though it didn't need it, just to have an excuse to work nearby. They shared meals, shared labor, shared the unspoken understanding that whatever this was, it had grown honestly, without force or fear. One evening, as the sun sank low and turned the prairie gold, Ruth stood beside Declan at the fence line where it had all begun. The posts were repaired now, sturdy, unremarkable. "Hard to believe," she said quietly. He nodded. "Storms pass. Some scars stay." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time, she didn't look away. Declan leaned in, slow enough that she could stop him if she wanted to. She didn't. Their kiss was gentle, unhurried, not a promise of forever, just an acknowledgement of what already was. When they parted, the wind moved through the grass, soft and warm. Life went on. Children learned. Seeds grew. And in a place where a woman had once been left to die, she now stood, teaching, choosing, belonging.